mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about episode 4 of the HBO Max original series, Station 11, entitled Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Aren't Dead. Now, I'm going to need you guys to bear with me for a little bit. I'm mostly unfamiliar with Shakespeare plays and Hamlet and all that stuff, so I need to do a little bit of research on this title and to help me gain some context and understanding as to why this particular episode will be given that particular title. And I think I kind of found it, but you can let me know your interpretation of the title in the comments if you so choose. But I'm going to look over here at my notes. I'm going to just read what I wrote because I don't want to mess up my description of these characters. And then I'm going to talk a bit about what I drew from this title. So apparently Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were childhood friends of Hamlet, but they acted as spies for King Claudius, who's Hamlet's uncle. At some point in the play, Claudius sends Hamlet to the King of England, accompanied by Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who have been kind of like working for him, I guess, for the entirety of the play. And then they're accompanied with a note that says, for the King of England to kill Hamlet. Hamlet finds the note. He changes the note to say that, to instruct the king to kill Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. He bails, and then later someone comes along and reports back that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. So that's, the title of the episode is almost pulled with the slight change of one word, is pulled directly from the text of Hamlet. And I think this refers to David and what was his name, Cody. And I don't really want to call them that. I want to say David and Cody in quotes because I feel like we learned this week that that's more than likely not their real names. There's a moment that I might get into it a little bit more later, but we find out that essentially David is called the prophet, and he walks around and he kind of like amasses like this cult following of kids, aka post-pans, people born after the pandemic, and he kind of gets this cult. And there's a moment where we find out that he shows up at this house with one story, a story. He has a name, he has a cane, he has a kid with him, and then he gets taken care of and sent on his way. Then comes back the very next day with no cane, a different name, a different story, and a different kid, and says a line that we hear a lot throughout this episode, there is no before. So that's why I kind of feel like we can't really say that it's David and Cody. I don't think that's their name. So I'm going to refer to him as the prophet from this point on. But I think the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of this are him and Cody, or maybe any other kid, honestly. Because like I said, I think the other kid doesn't really matter as far as who it is, but just look at it as kind of like a unnamed accomplice, like, a pairing or a group even of people who kind of like do this thing where they set you up through friendship to kind of take something away. And, ultimately in this case, they serve as the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to, I think, Alex / Kirsten's Hamlet. They come in offering friendship to both of them. And it ultimately results in what we think is the prophet's death. But Rosencrantz and Guildenstern aren't dead. He actually is alive. And then at the end of the episode, we see the results, I think, of what him not being dead produces. I'll get into that a little bit later, but I just kind of wanted to use that as like, not going into too much detail, but just kind of use it as giving some context to my interpretation of why that title was chosen. Essentially the idea of like, these guys were presented themselves as friends. They ultimately went to betray them. And since they are not actually dead, we end up with some pretty horrific results. What I loved about this episode is that I feel like it's starting to showcase this divide among the people who are still alive in year 20 between these pre-pans and post-pans. And we hear this a lot throughout this episode, and we see it with Alex in particular because she's the only post-pan. And they've created this divide in which you have the pre-pans, like most of the Traveling Symphony, who are kind of like stuck on the past. They're kind of just like literally with the Traveling Symphony, just running around in circles doing the same shit all the time and not really trying to move forward. But they're also dealing with like the most horrific trauma that has ever happened. So like, they're dealing with those memories still. And then you have the post pans and the prophet is pandering to these people And really, is he pandering though? Like, that's something that I'm going to enjoy exploring. But he is essentially seducing these kids with the idea of like, hey, these people who are around before this pandemic are just kind of keeping you stagnant. You want to have a life, you want to grow, you want to move forward, you want to break out of this kind of chain. You need to come hang with me because they're stuck in the past. But it also kind of creates this indifference toward the people who experienced the pandemic. And I think that's what is happening between Kirsten and Alex. Like you have, Alex wants to grow. Alex wants to be the lead in the play. She wants to see some change. She wants to see some growth, some evolution. But at the same time, and that's fine. And that's why I say it's not really pandering. Like that's a good thing to encourage out of these post pans. But it also comes with this, borderline rudeness and indifference toward the trauma that these people suffered not too long ago, 20 years. Like, it's not like this was 200 years ago and they're like, why you bring it up? Oh shit. Like these people are still alive. They experienced this. And there's there is no before is such, if you went through something like that, there couldn't be much of a bigger slap in the face. So like you have two sides that have rights to feel the way that they feel, but are both kind of still butting heads. And this episode really, really got that working. And I found that to be really interesting. And I think that's something that I'm going to enjoy this show exploring as it moves forward. This sparks a divide between Alex and Kirsten that, like I mentioned, that I find interesting because in the there's like a post show kind of like breakdown. It's maybe like 4 or 5 minutes. And the creator says something like, Alex comes off kind of like a petulant child. And she does, though. And like he tries to justify it, but she does. And it creates this split where they're just kind of like constantly butting heads. And I think from Alex's perspective, she doesn't mean it in a bad way, but she comes off so rude and indifferent. And there's a moment where they have an argument when they're doing this new version of Hamlet that I think from Alex's perspective, she was just acting. But the actual words in the play resonated with Kirsten, and she legitimately got pissed off. And I think we see later that Alex was just like, wow, that was fun. Great job. And Kirsten's kind of like, like, this is not working for me. Like, I don't like this kind of stuff that you're saying. And it results in probably the least surprising turn of events in the episode, which is Alex leaving on horseback. Ray Charles could have seen that coming. So, but I found that to be super, super interesting. And then also, this whole dynamic we find out actually ties in with the book, the Station 11 book, because we get actually via voiceover kind of like a bare bones kind of description of what the book is about. So this astronaut, Dr. 11, is floating unconscious in space, ends up at this space station. There's this captain there who is just sitting there drinking scotch, and I feel the captain can't be anyone but Arthur. And some sort of accident happens on the space station that drowns all the adults, and then the only people who are left are the kids, Dr. 11, and the captain. And the kids want to start a new future on Earth, a new Earth in the future, and the Dr. 11 and the captain are fairly indifferent. And sound familiar much? So like it sounds like, these dynamics at play are coming directly from the book, as in like the prophet is using this as his text. And I don't understand why Kirsten thinks she has the only copy. We know that Miranda had multiple copies, and I still kind of lean on the idea that the prophet, aka David, is Arthur's son from what was that girl's name? Something with an A. But that girl that he was cheating on Miranda with. I think that's the prophet. I think he's that kid grown up. But because we know that he has a copy of the book. But for whatever reason, Kirsten believes that she has the only copy of the book, and she wants to go after it. And I liked this side story too. This was such a dense episode because there was so much going on here. Because we've already got the pre-pan, post-pan shit at play, how this ties in with the book. A lot of scenes connecting Kirsten as an adult with Kirsten as a kid, in which we see that Kirsten as an adult is essentially being Jeevan when he was, essentially being a father to her. That's how Kirsten is being to Alex. And, well, fuck, I lost my train of thought there. Oh, yes. So Kirsten becomes convinced that she has the only copy of this book. And we get an interesting kind of backstory about why they don't go to this town called Pingtree. And apparently, Sarah slash the conductor, her ex, I guess, husband Gil, what would happen is they would hit the point that they were at, and then the group would split between the actors and the musicians, and the actors would go to Pingtree, and the musicians would go somewhere else. And apparently Gil, who was their director at the time, had a whole side marriage kind of deal with this chick named Katrina in Pingtree. Sarah found out about it. She took a shot at him, apparently grazed him or something like that. And then I think kind of depending on who you ask, either he was kicked out or he left the group and they hadn't been there anymore. So, I'm wondering kind of like, what does this story have to do with anything? But then we find out that Kirsten, again, believing she has the only copy of the book, hid it in Gil's office in Pingtree. And that made for an interesting dynamic because they don't overtly say this, but I believe that Kirsten then lies to Sarah saying like, hey, I heard that Katrina is dead. And then immediately Sarah goes, hey, we're going to split the shit back up again. And the actors are heading to Pingtree. And that works because that allows Kirsten to try to go see if the book is there or not. And then later we get a scene where everyone's kind of arguing about how they operated in the past versus how they're operating now. And Sarah seems kind of like she's got her back against the wall as far as to, Gil's interpretation of Hamlet. And speaking of which, Gil's played by David Cross, which I thought was a very nice touch. David Cross is always kind of pretty fun to have on the screen, but I thought he did a great job of making that fun kind of nature, like turning that down a little bit and turning up his serious actor a little bit. I thought he did a good job in this. And she seems to almost kind of have like a knee-jerk reaction and says like, oh, we made all these changes and now Alex is the lead. And I again, they don't say it directly, but I took from that Sarah realized that she was lied to about Katrina being dead. And as a get back, like as a punishment almost toward Kirsten for lying, she makes Alex the lead, which I thought was like a really well done kind of like unspoken kind of fight that those two had. So I thought that was pretty fun. Let's see, what else did I have here? Well, she goes and finds that her book is still where she left it, which I think, again, it's either going to make this prophet guy look even more amazing to her, or she is going to come to the realization that she doesn't have the only copy of the book. Let's see, what else do I have here? Okay, yeah, that was it. We also see a little bit of year one with young Kirsten and Jeevan. And there's a lot of questions raised here. We don't know what happened. They're in a cabin. Frank's not around. They seem to be at odds over the book. She accuses Jeevan of taking it. She mentioned something like, you made us leave Frank. He says they should have left sooner, but they didn't because of her play. I guess I'm not even going to hypothesize about what that means. There's a shot of her holding a baby. I don't know who's that. Is that this other Frank that she mentioned before? This baby brother Frank, whatever. And we don't know what happened with the book. But at the end of the episode, she can't find Jeevan, and she finds the book like in the middle of the snow. So really interested to find out what happens with that. I don't think that's going to be a next episode sort of thing. Let's see. What else did I have that I want to talk about? Let's see. We talked about, I have something I want to mention about Pingtree. Oh, no, I talked about that. The mayor and the mayor, Gil and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover as far as like a lot of the concepts and whatnot that was going on here. So a couple of thoughts. I thought that minefield scene was sick when Alex starts running through it and everyone panics. I thought that was a really cool scene, although I didn't care for how we knew that they were already in the middle of the minefield. Alex runs safely to Gil. No explosions happen. Kirsten says, like, did anyone see how she got there? And then it just cuts to them being at a dinner table. And I'm like, I really don't like how they just skipped over however they got out of that minefield. But I did think the scene itself was really cool. Also, why didn't Kirsten feel the need to put back all those golf balls she let fall out? Like, that was such a sloppy kind of like I can't believe Gil would buy that she was just there reading his book about what happened pre-pandemic. and she like, why is she kneeling? She like doesn't put very much effort into hiding that she put this book behind her, in the back of her dress. Like, I don't know, like that just seemed weird. Like, if you're trying to hide, you're doing a terrible job. And lastly, the not quite the final scene, but what felt like it should have been the final scene, this explosion, incredibly well done. I mean, fantastic. I love how they had Sarah playing some sort of music that was just heightening the tension while Kirsten is chasing the one kid with the mine strapped to their body through the house, the other kids talking to Gil. And you could tell that Gil, I think, is trying to still play like almost like a father figure, and trying to keep it super cool, but desperately sees the mine and wants to get it off, but is trying to play it cool. And the fact that they just come in and hug him, oh man, that was a sick scene. And using music to make a scene have a harder punch is something that The Leftovers was incredible with. And I've been comparing this to The Leftovers, and I'm going to continue to do so until it is no longer comparable to The Leftovers, because that was the use of music there to heighten that tension was expertly done. So yeah, really great episode. And this show is just so dense. And I thought about doing, when I saw that they released both episodes, the next 2 episodes today, I thought about, like, the first video doing all 3 episodes. I thought, let me do another video with, covering the 2 episodes. But I feel like that's too much of a shortchanging of this show. I feel like this show is old, kind of like a breakdown per episode, where I can go a little bit deeper into what's happening in the episode, as opposed to just kind of like really trying to like mash everything in real quick. So, let's see, we talked about the title, how I thought Rosencrantz and Guildenstern kind of referred to the prophet and any other kid that was there. So we covered that. And we covered how I don't think that's their names. Let's see. So we covered the the divide among the people, about the pre-pans versus the post-pans, and the way that's creating a divide between Alex and Kirsten. We talked about how that tied into the comic that we saw, that we heard the voiceover about what it's about. We talked about that thing with Kirsten in the past and dealing with Jeevan. We talked about Kirsten and Sarah and how I feel like she was being punished for lying. Yeah, I think this covered everything that I wanted to talk about. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this one up. Sorry, I feel like this was a little sloppily done. I had my notes well organized, but I felt like it was gonna take longer for me to kind of talk about these things that I enjoyed about this episode. But I'm gonna wrap this one up, and I'm gonna get started on editing this one, and I'm also simultaneously gonna start on the next episode, and then after that's done, I'm gonna get that video done and get that one up as well. So whenever, if you're somebody who's watching this as soon as it got up, expect the next one in probably about 2 hours or so. And till then, peace.